On this week's show, we'll be exploring two topics tonight that are close to my heart, and it's pay equity in theater. You know how people get paid, and how equality and equity and getting it done in the right way. And then, of course, thinking about getting things done in the right way. Oh my God, the triple pandemic of COVID-19 and racism, in the United States, and the social unrest that is pushing back against all of that. How that kind of all lands even right into my neighborhood where there's street violence and that kind of stuff. So it's all connected, and we want to talk about that. And we've got an amazing lineup of guests. So let us get started now.
It's my pleasure to welcome to the show Elsa Hiltner, designer, writer, organizer, and collaboration staff and company member, and Lauren Sivak, the managing director of Second Story, both very active in the pay equity movement in theater. Welcome. Hey, Lauren.
Hey, how are you, Anthony? Hello, Dr. Marcus Robinson.
Hey. Oh, my goodness. Look at there. We'll get Elsa's up. We'll be going here in a minute.
She's zooming in from Wisconsin. There's an 8-second delay when you come from Wisconsin. There she is.
It's true.
Hello, Elsa.
Hey.
Thanks for having us and having this conversation.
Of course. This great pause that we are in the midst of has some benefits to it. It allows us all to stop and really think about what we've been doing and why we've been doing it, and maybe change our course of action. And Collaboration has announced a new equitable pay for all policy. Lauren, we'd love to hear about what Second Story is doing to address pay equity. I have a lot to say about it as a producer of Chicago theater for a long time, who was part of a system in every which way, and I know I'm grateful for this pause. But I'd first like to hear your stories. Elsa, let's start with you. What's been your journey to become a voice for pay equity, an organizer, and somebody who is really getting people to think before they budget?
So, I think, growing up in this system, in this industry, like the way we do it felt very normal for a long time. And I started looking at how garment workers were having labor issues, and I was very passionate about that. And then I realized that I was facing the same things as a costume designer. And so that kind of started me on the labor equity track, trying to get the same technical support for different design aspects. And that is another form of pay equity if you're doing two jobs for the price of one. And then that was kind of the beginning of getting more involved with pay equity, realizing that people are not paid equitably at all in theater or the arts, and feeling like I could help start that conversation, keep it going, and hopefully get people to make some changes.
And if you don't know, Elsa's a terrific costume designer. She and I did many shows together, costume too many humans to possibly count, hundreds. But tell us about, like, when did, as a designer, in the industry, you don't have to name names if you don't want, but when did you kind of open the curtain and say, oh my gosh, this is messed up?
Yeah, well, so I wrote my first essay the summer of 2016, and that was really out of, I stopped buying new clothes because I couldn't support, stitchers in all sorts of countries, including the US, not being paid minimum wage or even a living wage. And, costume designers kind of talk amongst ourselves about how nuts the system of labor is, where we also have to build everything while the scenic and lighting designers often have technical support, but not much was written about it. And so I decided that I should write about it in the historical context of the garment industry. And and then as I kind of, like kept designing with that essay behind my name, I realized that I was not being paid the same. And that was really from conversations that people had with me sharing fees. And, like I definitely never share names like publicly because everybody, like all theater companies are doing it badly, and calling out one in particular, can be useful, but I feel like talking about the system that it is, it's not particularly useful for me. And so it was like a series of shows that I was doing basically from 2016 onward, where it was just like every single time I asked about fees, it was like, oh, I'm being paid $500 less than everybody else on the team. And, the way that people saw me when I was negotiating was not particularly favorable, even when it seems so obvious that I should be paid at least the same amount when I'm also doing two jobs. That made me, want to continue writing, starting the pay resource document where designers can enter in their pay information, and try to get people talking in person, and also break down the stigma of sharing pay information and talking about money.
Thank you. I would love to figure out how we can apply what you did in our industry to other systems of oppression, but we'll come back to that. Lauren, tell us about your story about putting this policy together at Second Story, and what is the policy and where are you at, and what's your narrative and your journey into this work?
I think my journey is like a lot of artists who come to Chicago and know that Chicago is known for its scrappy storefront theater. And I adhered for a long time to the old adage, you got to pay your dues. And paying your dues often meant being paid very little or not at all for your work. And that is a really hard mode of thinking to break when you become a decision maker. And so in the 2015-16 season, when I was at Second Story, this is my first full season at Second Story where I was responsible for the budget. Our producer had reached out to a director who had worked with us many times before to see if this director would like to work with us in the upcoming season. And she politely declined and said, I no longer accept work when the stipend is less than a rate of $10 an hour. And I was so insulted, because I was like, well, wait a minute. We're not asking you to direct, 4 hours a night for 4 weeks in a row, and then do all of this tech and all this stuff. And well, I know these big theaters, they don't pay their assistant directors, or I know they don't pay much more when I start to compare the work. And it took me a long time to really honestly reflect on the fact that, like, I don't get to use somebody else's inequities as a way to absolve me of my own inequities. And so that was like the first time where I was like, okay, so we really need to start thinking about how we pay our artists. But, and I suspect this will come up, one of the challenges at that time was like, well, I don't know how do we make that leap? As many artists as we want to employ, even though it does not count as employment if you pay somebody a $250 stipend for an 8-week experience. But how do we start leveraging growth to do better? And a year and a half ago, coming out of the Non-Equity Jeff Awards, Chris Vire wrote a really important article about like the non-equity theaters in this town that have been non-equity for a long time. Why do you stay non-equity? A lot of hypotheses there, but a frequent collaborator with Second Story shared that post and posed the question, are you a club or are you an organization? And it's fine if you're a club. There are incredible clubs that do incredible work, but if you're going to purport to be an organization, a marker of a professional organization is one that thinks about the way it pays its artists. And so I went to our artistic director and I said, hey, a Second Story show, which is a different model than a theater, but how many hours are our storytellers, our producers, our directors, our curators putting in to make a second story show happen. And once I found the hours and I took the stipend and divided it by the hours, and I had a hard look at what we were paying our people. You can either do something about that embarrassment, or you can hope that nobody catches you. And I'm not a hope that nobody catches me kind of person. I'm embarrassed and we have to do something about it. And so the process for Second Story, our Leap to 15, which is a 2-year commitment to pay every artist we work with a stipend based on $15 an hour. Obviously the pandemic threw a couple of wrenches in this moment of explosive growth. We thought we'd make one leap to 15. Instead, year 1 is a jump to 10. Year 2 is a leap to 15. It is a little scary to share that what we were paying our storytellers was essentially a rate based on $1.20 an hour. But we have to go from like, we have to say, this is where we're starting and this is where we're going. You know, our directors were making $3 an hour. Our curators were making $4 an hour. None of that is equitable. And to your point, Anthony, there are a lot of challenges that we all have to contend with. And it would be very easy to say, well, you know what, we can't make this leap right now because we're all figuring out how to balance the books. We're all figuring out how to weather the storm that we're already in and also the storm that's coming. Anybody who was in a leadership position in 2016 knows the impact of the 2016 election on individual giving. But if we don't make this change now in this moment of collective pause, I worry that we will not make this change when we come out of it.
You know, the Chicago storefront scene, as you know, amazing and legendary as it was and is, was really quite an anomaly, right? Like, it grew so big, so many companies, that there became this, you know, there was a lot of companies, and at a time, Collaborative Action was one of them until we changed our mission in 2012, that were really more about career development and, you know, a non-equity minor league system to not just the Goodman and Steppenwolf, but to NBC and eBay commercials, and because you can't really make a living wage as an equity actor. And when I thought about, like, why all the, you know, because we used to compare each other to our pay to our peers, and so that made us real easy to feel good about it. But then you have a couple shows that don't do so well, and you get some deficit, and you start just looking at the bottom line and trying to, you know, reduce risk as much as you can. And along the way, everybody is just, you know, working way too hard for way too long. I think a big part of the issue is, like for Collaborative Action, we had to make a mission adjustment and really make sure the value proposition of our mission was right. And once we did that, it took time, but things had started to really change when we weren't just one of the 200 theater companies that are working towards career development, you know, but we were really focused on our audience and their lives. And I think this is a great time for all companies to really look in the mirror, not just at how white supremacy shows up in your organization, but all oppression. And, you know, as Elsa has made sure to make sure I know, you know, this is an issue. A lot of this is driven by patriarchy, right? And we did a show called Gender Breakdown that used data from Kay Crone that really showed not the pay disparity, but just the lack of opportunities for women as writers, directors, set designers, lighting designers, and how most stage managers and costume designers were women. So now that we are starting to have the conversation, this is for either of you, knowing that we're in a pandemic, what would you say to a larger sized executive director about how to start thinking about pay equity and how to implement it?
So for me, it's like, this is a big gift to have all of this time to plan. Most of the bigger houses, many of the theater companies are not producing work. And so they really have time to look at their priorities and like build their budget based on what they're prioritizing. And I think a lot of theater companies kind of like cordon off, like maybe all the actors are paid equitably and the designers are paid equitably and the staff are paid equitably. But if you connect those groups, there's no equity between them. And so, using this time and like really understanding that your budget is your value system, I think would be really valuable.
Yeah, something that I find myself thinking about very frequently as we think about pay equity is our community has no reservations around holding the smaller and mid-sized theaters accountable. Our community has a hard time holding the major theaters accountable because it is hard to hold the Goodmans or the Steppenwolfs or the Writers theaters accountable when they are the opportunity, right? That is what we're working towards. And I think until we actually as a community hold all theaters accountable, it's going to be very hard. I mean, I'm hopeful that organizations like Collaboration and Second Story, and I know Free Street has an equitable pay model, can lead the way. But I really hope that we actually start to really compel the leaders of the major theaters to think about pay transparency. Elsa and I have had a couple of conversations about pay equity. I run a managing directors roundtable for women identified managing directors of budgets $1 million or less. If there's anybody who's tuning in right now who fits that mold and is not part of the MD roundtable, please reach out. But we wanted to talk about designers. And one of the things that Elsa, when I shared with her the Leap to 15, she was like, great, what do your ED or MD and leadership make? And what's the difference between what they make and the artists make? And I make a salary based on $25 an hour. Our artists now get stipends based on $10 an hour. That is not a pay gap that I'm embarrassed by. I want it to be smaller. I'm not in this profession I'm not interested in leveraging Second Story's growth to inflate my salary. I'm interested in leveraging Second Story's growth for long-term sustainability for an organization whose mission I believe in. And I think for any AD, ED of any theater in this town or country that is unwilling to share their salary or their hourly, like what it is based on hourly, that is information for them that is really helpful. But I can't do anything if they don't want to do anything with that information. I'm hoping that is information they can learn, are willing to share, and are willing to make actual change inspired by that.
I think one of the things is like there's not many models for pay equity in the arts, partially because I think people are worried about backlash if they, come out and say what they've been doing or what they're planning to do, maybe what they weren't doing last year. And because there's not many models, people don't know how to do it. Sometimes people don't even understand what pay equity, like the phrase, means. I'm in the process of contacting every theater in the League of Chicago Theaters and asking them if they'd like to talk to me about pay equity. And I'm writing another essay for HowlRound. But there's been a lot of like the smaller theaters and like the mid-sized theaters that I've had conversations with, but the large ones have not responded for the most part. But I'm hoping that, more models, more transparency, people will see how they can use these models to work for them.
And the thing that really connects this conversation to the one that we'll have in the next segment is that what you're really talking about is trying to find equity in a system that is based on oppression, patriarchy, white supremacy, using hierarchy as its tool in order to mete out the funds and the value creation and worth conversations. So this business about finding pay equity, we do need to do the things that we're talking about now: transparency, folks really stepping out, creating new models. But we have to recognize that is happening inside of institutions that need significant transformation, and that can only come from the inside out. So Um, but the action, I see what you folks are doing when you're writing the articles and whatnot. It's a kind of direct action too. I mean, that's not marching down Michigan Avenue, but at the same point, that marches down the Michigan Avenue of my executive director brain and, and says, I better listen to the folk that are around me and start, doing exactly as Lauren is doing it, and that is, closing the gap between what I'm paid and what they're paid, and doing it on a model that feels like it's leaning into the thing, even if it's not, even if it's not yet reached the ultimate goal of the thing, because the ultimate goal won't get reached unless we deal with the oppression in the system, white supremacy, male dominance, patriarchy, that whole thing.
If you're a 501c3 nonprofit, there should be a business model that rewards equitable payment and good vibes on your team. You're going to get better art, and the donors would be more generous if they know what you're doing. And if that can have a ripple effect in Chicago, it could go nationally. I wonder if we have anybody in our Zoom room who'd like to ask a question. Go ahead and put it in the chat, or maybe we'll even bring you on air. If there's anything you want to say or ask, let us know. Lauren, it looked like you were about to say something. I didn't want to cut you off.
No, it's fine. I mean, I'm obvious. Not paying people equitably is an oppressive lever, and we know that, like, when we would offer somebody, hey, we'd like to pay you $30 to come tell your story, that, like, doing your job should not cost you money. When every other industry is talking about the fight for 15, the arts should not be excluded. I also think, Anthony, to your point, we have to change the way the income model. No foundation has ever asked me, what do you pay your artists? No donor has ever asked me, what do you pay your artists? When I've started to talk about the leap to 15, I'd be curious to hear, Dr. Robinson, from you on this. People are like, but why? Why do you want to pay artists 15? Because we have to change there are many people who still think that art is always going to be a passion project. We announced the leap to 15, and we boosted that post. Much to my chagrin, I don't want to line the pockets of Mark Zuckerberg, but I do want people to know about important initiatives in our industry. Sure. Of course, we had people say, some artists suck and should starve. Who do you think deserves to be paid? They should get real jobs and gig on the side. And even though these are some internet trolls, if you will, that is not an uncommon line of thinking that I haven't faced when I've talked about this with donors and with corporate sponsors, because there still is that disconnect. And we, as within the industry, we need to change the way we do this insider baseball talk and figure out, like, a unified language to talk to the folks who fund the nonprofit theater in our city and country.
We have a great question in the chat. You see that, Marcus?
Yeah.
Let's bring that question into the Zoom, and then we're going to have to move on. Kelly says, I just don't understand what would motivate the larger companies to pay out more money. We don't seem to be in any position of power when there's always someone willing to step up and work for free.
Yeah. So I'm working right now on a article that's about the benefits to companies. It's very obvious what the benefits are to artists for pay equity. But there's so many benefits to the companies, including artists who are not overworked, artists who can focus, artists who come back, so you have that institutional knowledge and, like, able to collaborate with a team that they've communicated with before. There's lots of benefits to companies aside from just doing the right thing and treating your workers like valued parts of your organization.
And maybe
when I think about larger companies that are considered central to a thriving economy is reliant on a robust and diverse art sector. An art sector does not exist without artists. So if company, like, one of the worries that we have coming out of this pandemic is we're going to lose a generation of artists. So if these larger companies that actually have the capacity, it's not, when we think about fundraising, capacity, affinity, and interest, there's the capacity to pay people more. There's not really the town that benefit from unpaid labor, right? My first internship was at a mid-size equity house, 9 months unpaid. I'm not dissimilar from many of my peers. I was able to do that because of privilege. And until these big organizations acknowledge that we have the capacity to pay people more, we just don't have the interest. We have to really distinguish those two things, because that they don't have to. That's why they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to put a period in my conversation on this one is that what's required at this point in the struggle is a business case analysis that speaks to the business case for equitable pay in the arts, so that my organization can understand how to leverage that business motive to produce the end results that we want. So the business case has to be addressed, and we did that in the kind of the diversity, equity, inclusion world, where 30 years ago we were talking about what's the business case of diversity. Well, now everybody knows that there's a business case of diversity, and now we try to get on with inclusion and equity kind of thing. So a similar process needs to be engaged in. So I'll stop there and go, you folks you have the tiger by the tail, and you know what? Keep pulling. Keep pulling for it. Keep doing it. We're rooting for you.
You know, maybe people spend.
I just want to say it is directly tied to diversity too. We have an art sector that goes with privilege in every way that you slice privilege, and you know that's not a thriving arts industry.
In the 1700s and 1800s, internships were called slavery. It's slave labor. Come on, it's just a polite way of doing it today. It's the same oppressive device being used in cheap labor being used today. We can't do that. We can't rely on that. And it's not because it's the right thing to do, but because you could actually make more money and make more art and provide more services by lifting the artists up. The cultural creative is the culture bearer for all of us. So we have to do this work.
And put the priority on the people, not the materials. You know, we spend so much money on wood and video projectors, and you know, I've heard of some theaters that spend tens of thousands of dollars on costumes, but they don't pay their costume designer properly.
Everything coming out of this moment, I do deeply believe that human-centered arts organizations are going to come out stronger and more resilient when we're on the other side of this. And when I talk about the other side, I think like August 2021. And it is that human-centered approach, because that's what we're hungry for. That's what the industry needs. And that's what I have a lot of hope for those of us who make it across whatever this finish line looks like.
We're going to make it. We'll make it. Thank you.
And the Rainforest Cafe just closed downtown, so I think you have a good point there about human-centric, because they're invested in that big plastic fake frog. Lauren and Elsa, thank you for joining us. Check out what's going on at Second Story. Do you have anything coming up? A virtual?
We've done 15 virtual events since March. Since the close down, they've been great. We're doing a virtual fundraiser, aren't we all? But on September 12th, it's called The Statement Piece. Put your money where your heart is, put your money where your art is. And all of this actually does go to the artists. We're fundraising for the leap to 15. We're not just saying when you make a donation to our theater, it goes to the artist. A lot of organizations say that, but I'm willing to show you our budget.
All right, we'll have you back on for a budget show. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Can't wait.
Thank you, Elsa.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. How wonderful.